There's mainly two types of employees in Pakistan. You have the management, and he usually negotiates his own contract of employment, which means the employer and the manager can determine what rights and obligations will be encompassed in that contract. However, there's a general practice. These are complemented by other policies and procedures which exist in the organization. So the important thing for management is to be aware of what those rights are, to make them as clear as possible, to make them as certain as possible. Otherwise, you will always have these cases where one employee saying, well, this particular right wasn't interpreted correctly, I haven't been treated properly, etc., etc. So clarity, certainty is important when you're dealing with employees. The other type of employee which exists is called the workman. Now, he has a contract of employment, but a lot of his rights are governed by various legislation, like the IRO, Industrial Relationship, or Minimum Wage Act, or Compensation Act. So we need to be aware of all the plethora of legislation that exists there. Just reinforcing what I've said, regulators, why do they exist? I mean, they have an important role to play. They're there to create an environment which is conducive for the business. They're not there to thwart the business, but there to make sure there's a level playing field for all the business, and they create an environment which business can progress. So what is important when dealing with regulators? I think engaging with the regulators is important. Engage early, see what's happening with the legislation or regulations which are being developed in your part of the industry. Get your feedback or input through the various organizations like the Chambers of Commerce, OICCI, ICAP, so that it's better to prevent something which takes away from the conducive environment before it becomes a regulation rather than afterwards when it becomes a difficult challenge. So it's important to engage and work with your regulators because they're there actually to create the right environment in which businesses can succeed. Whether that happens or not depends from regulator for regulator and from which individuals are in that particular post. In Pakistan, most important regulator for companies, and I'm talking about listed companies, is the SCCP. For banks, obviously, it will be the State Bank, and obviously a lot of the listed companies, the stock exchanges. We show compliance with companies under listing regulations. I'm just going to quickly rush through there, but again, a lot of powers with the SCCP as a regulator to ensure that all the companies are complying with the various legislation in place, and they have teeth by being able to impose various punishments. Build good relationships and give input in future before it becomes law. Now, discussing in-house versus external. First of all, looking at an in-house. In-house counsel, if you look historically, were brought in to bring down the costs. What was happening was the legal fees were getting out of hand and they were going up astronomically, and the thought process said, well, if you bring an in-house counsel, he can bring the cost down. And that was the initial reason behind it. However, now the role of an in-counsel lawyer has evolved. There are two types of in-house counsel. You can usually have a generalist or you can have a specialist. It depends on the type of business you're running. And it would be up to the business to decide whether they want a generalist or a specialist. What does he bring to the party? Obviously, once he becomes in-house, his role is changed from just being a lawyer to being a manager, to being a business partner. So he's there to add value, which means he should understand the business, he should get involved in various business discussions, and he should be able to advise not just from a legal perspective, but from a business perspective. He has to, as we put it, add value. Everybody working for an organization has to add value, which means that translates to the bottom line. If you're not able to join the dots where the in-house counsel is adding to the bottom line, then I think the question has to be asked whether that particular in-house counsel or legal department is justified its existence. Generally, in-house counsel should be talking manager's language rather than a lawyer's language, because he should have the ability to engage and communicate with the internal client. Because he works with them, he should use the business language rather than the legal jargon. So it's a good relationship, strong relationship, because there's only one client. An external counsel, what are the benefits? The benefits, they are an expert in their field, and you are able to tap that expertise when required. They should have up-to-date knowledge because they're doing the same thing day in, day out. Another thing we found is, especially when we use them in litigation, more than just giving legal advice, they're able to devise a strategy or tactics how to manage a particular litigation. And that kind of input is very valuable, which in-house counsel cannot provide. And the most important thing obviously is an in-house counsel is an employee of the organization. And this question of which is always being discussed, especially after Enron and the WorldCom debacles, is whether in-house counsel is independent and is he providing objective advice. An external counsel is in that position, and so it's always advisable on major important transactions to get that independent objective advice, because that's the one that's going to save if things go wrong. However, it's always a challenge working in any environment to get your external lawyer to give you the time and focus that you want for what you're paying him for. So making sure they're professionals, they work on timely basis. As in-house counsels, we need to advise the management board, so we need to get feedback or input on a timely professional basis. They need to give the time to understand the issue at hand rather than just running away with it. Some lawyers tend to have a tendency with that. And they need to explain their advice clearly. Legal cost. Well, there's three main ways of dealing with that. One is retainership, where you have a lawyer on a retainership where you can pay him a monthly fee in return for a limited number of hours of advice or on simple advice. This has its advantages, big advantages. You develop a relationship, he understands your business more and more, but obviously the downside is you're committed to making payment month on month. And so the question is, if you're utilizing him properly, it could be advantageous. Lump sum, I found in Pakistan usually the lump sum fee is used in litigations. You make a payment, a lump sum payment for each forum. There is no real other way dealing with litigation. You make a lump sum payment to the lawyer for each forum, and as he moves, the downside obviously is whether he actually wants to finish the case or take it to the next level to get another lump sum payment. The hourly one works where you're getting either it's a transactional issue at hand or an advisory. So depending on how many hours he's going to spend on that particular piece of work, you may want to negotiate an hourly fees, which generally works out to be lower than a lump sum. Because if you ask him for a lump sum, he probably calculated 10 hours plus another 5 for good measures and then give you a lump sum based on that. So it's horses for courses. You really need to look what the transaction, what the issue is, what's the best way, which would you like. Travel and other expenses are always on actuals and reimbursed, but you need to keep an eye on that because they can escalate more than the fee itself. Learnings. In a litigation, I always thought it's best to hire a local lawyer. He tends to know the people, knows the system, and generally is able to deliver results quicker than if you bring somebody from outside. There's no science behind what lawyers' fees are. It's demand and supply. The lawyer which is in demand, he will charge a higher fee. However, one thing I found is that the lawyers' fees are generally not what you hear quoted by different people. But it's always worthwhile talking to your counterpart in another organization, and you find out actually his fees are quite less than the one that have been quoted in the market. So maybe that's a marketing tool used by lawyers to enhance their fees. So it's always good to talk to your counterparts and find what is actually happening. And there are obviously opportunities. A lot of the litigation in Pakistan that happens is very common to